When power begins to fear infants, it has already lost. Egypt stood at the peak of its strength. Stone, gold, armies, perfect order. The empire was so confident in itself that it treated people as mere numbers. But why did Pharaoh hear the alarm first, not in the noise of riots, but in the silence of maternity wards? The nation of slaves was growing too fast. There were too many of them. Their future was more terrifying than any weapon. The decision was simple and ice cold. Every newborn boy must die. Without trial, without a name, without a history. At night, orders moved through the houses, spoken in whispers. Cries were smothered in cloth. Mothers learned not to scream. Egypt wasn't collapsing from wars. It simply began to fear life itself. Empires always lose the moment they start a war against the future.
In the shadow of terror, a child was born, a child forbidden to breathe. His mother didn't argue with the law. She did something far more dangerous. She ripped fear out of her heart and cast it aside. 3 months of silence, 3 months of holding her breath, and then the edge. Either you wait for the executioner or you leap into the void. A basket, tar, the murky reeds of the Nile, the water where by law he was meant to drown. She didn't know who would look inside. She didn't know if the river would be a cradle or a grave. She simply let go. It wasn't weakness, it was the fury of faith, because salvation begins exactly where you lose all control. There, where the river was supposed to take a life, it opened the door to eternity. Faith is madness until it becomes your destiny. He was found by the daughter of the man who had ordered him to die. The symbol of the empire pulled its own destruction from the water and didn't recognize it. She didn't see a threat. She saw life. She gave him a name, Moses, drawn from the water. He grew up where he was meant to be sacrificed. The stone beneath his feet was smooth. Teachers whispered the formulas of power. He was taught to break others, not to obey. Moses knew Egypt from the inside, its icy strength, its iron logic, its blind pride. But inside him, a crack was widening. He looked at the slaves and saw no numbers in the reports. He saw faces reflecting his own secret. A double life, prince on the outside, stranger on the inside, the tension that cannot be held forever. Sometimes God grows your liberation right in the heart of the system that hates it most.
One blow, 1 second of rage, and your life is no longer your own. Moses saw an Egyptian beating a slave. It wasn't justice, it was pure sadistic humiliation. And in that heartbeat, the mask of the prince shattered. The education, the status, the safety of the royal court collapsed. He struck. The Egyptian fell dead. This wasn't a triumph, it was a catastrophe. You killed an officer of the crown to protect someone who, officially, is no one. The price of this mistake? Everything. The palace became a trap. Your name became a death warrant. Your future evaporated with the final breath of your fallen enemy. Moses fled into the desert not as a hero, but as hunted prey.
a man without a home, without a people, without ground beneath his feet. He realized the most terrifying truth. Egypt no longer wanted him, and he had not yet found his own people. But it is exactly here, in total failure, God is preparing the turn. Where you see a dead end, he sees the start of the journey. The desert asks no questions. It simply erases your answers. The years in Midian turned the prince of Egypt into a mere shadow. Moses became a shepherd, not a leader, not a liberator, not a hero. A man following someone else's flock, learning patience from the stones. Your name is forgotten. Your rage has cooled into ash. Your ambitions have shriveled to the size of a single sip of water. Your horizon is just a search for pasture, not the conquest of the world. Did you think life ended that day when you struck the Egyptian? Did you think the sand had buried your calling forever? But it is exactly there, where you ceased to feel important, that God begins to write your true story. Before you can lead millions, you must learn to lead yourself. The bush burned, yet it was not consumed. This wasn't a show. It was a fire that does not destroy the wood, but incinerates who you used to be. The voice did not flatter. It cut through the silence like a blade. Take off your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy ground. In that second, Moses was not offered wealth. He was not promised easy glory. He was given a sentence to return. Return to the place where the executioner waits. Look into the eyes of the man who thinks he is a god, and lead a people who have long ceased to believe in you or in themselves. Moses trembled. He clung to his weakness. He cried about his stutter, his fear, his insignificance, and he heard the answer that shatters all logic. It doesn't matter who you are. It matters that I will be with you. Your calling will never find you in your comfort zone. It will find you exactly where you are least prepared for greatness. Pharaoh was not expecting a prophet. He was expecting numbers, reports, and deep bows. Egypt stood immovable. Columns, gold, the dead silence of discipline. An empire never notices the cracks until they begin to scream. Moses entered that hall not as a fugitive and not as a prince. He entered as a man whose voice no longer belonged to him. He said only 4 words, "Let my people go." But Pharaoh heard a verdict. You are no longer a god. You are no longer in control. In that heartbeat, the masks fell away.
Go.
This was not a
My
debate
people.
about religion. It was a war for the control of reality itself. Pharaoh could not back down, not just because of cruelty, but because power that recognizes a force higher than itself ceases to be power. His heart turned to stone, and when the heart of a ruler turns to stone, the entire nation pays the price. Power never resists God. It fights until its final breath against the loss of its own control. The plagues were not magic tricks for the crowd. They were a language in which eternity began to explain to Egypt its mistakes. The sacred Nile turned into blood. Why? Because for centuries the life of slaves had been treated as a resource. Now the empire had to drink what it had spilled on its construction sites. Darkness covered the land, thick, tangible. Why? because light in this country had long belonged only to the chosen few. For 3 days the Egyptians could not see one another, because they had forgotten how to see the human being in those who served them. Disease, chaos, death. This was not revenge, it was a mirror. God simply showed the empire its own reflection. And Pharaoh? He did not surrender. He bargained. He promised freedom when it hurt and returned to the whip as soon as the pain subsided. Do you know why? Because for a tyrant, admitting a mistake is more terrifying than continuing it. Humans are strange creatures. They often choose a familiar, habitual pain over an unknown, terrifying freedom. When the people left Egypt, they did not celebrate. They trembled. Behind them, the finest army in the world. The roar of chariots, the clatter of metal, the scent of inevitable slaughter. In front of them, the sea, cold, silent, a black abyss. Inside them, emptiness. A slave knows how to survive under the whip, but a slave does not know what to do with a horizon that has no rest. Moses was told, do not believe those who say he was made of steel. His hands shook when he raised his staff, but he stepped forward. Not because he knew the ending, but because there was no longer a path back. The sea did not part simply by command. It parted for a trust that is born only when you are squeezed between death and a miracle. The walls of water rose to the heavens. They walked across the floor, hearing their hearts pound in their throats. And when the water collapsed, burying their past, a terrifying silence fell. The fear of the Egyptians was replaced by another fear, one much deeper. What now? Who are we without our chains? Freedom is always more terrifying than slavery, because in slavery, the master is responsible for you. But in freedom, for every breath, only you are responsible. Freedom turned out to be too loud. It turned out to be hungry. And the most terrifying part, it came with no instructions. Only a few weeks passed, and people began to remember Egypt with fondness. Memory is a lying lawyer. It erased the whistle of the whip, but kept the smell of the Egyptian meat pots. There they were beaten, but there they were fed. There they were ordered around, but there they never had to choose. There they didn't have to think about how to survive until tomorrow. They were angry at Moses, but not because he was a bad leader, but because he led them to a place where they finally had to grow up. They hated the emptiness of the desert, because in it there was no one else to blame for their own cowardice. Do you know the bitterest truth of this story? Not everyone dreams of escaping slavery. Most people just want their slavery to be a little more comfortable. Freedom is not a celebration. It is the grueling work of building your own soul. While Moses stood in the cloud of glory at the summit, the people below could not endure the silence. They didn't want an invisible God. They wanted an idol they could touch, something they could manage, something they could blame if the rain didn't fall tomorrow. The golden calf was not just a piece of metal. It was their longing for predictability, their cry, give us back a familiar slavery instead of this terrifying freedom. When Moses came down, he didn't just see a sin. He saw the primal terror of a crowd that had lost its guide. At that moment, he realized the bitterest truth. To be a leader means to always stand between heaven and earth, to be a bridge trampled by both sides. Bridge, you no longer belong to God because you are responsible for these people, and you do not belong to the people because you have seen what they cannot comprehend. The shattered tablets, they were not an act of rage, they were a lament that truth cannot fit into the hearts of those used to chains. People do not betray God, they betray their own hope that someone else will do everything for them. No one will bring you freedom on a golden platter. Moses did not enter the promised land. Stop. Feel that for a moment. 40 years of sand, 40 years of riots, 40 years of others whining and personal loneliness. And there it is, the goal, visible on the horizon. But God says, stop. From here, they go on without you. He didn't miss it because of weakness, but because even titans remain human. One breakdown, one strike at the rock in anger instead of a gentle word. One moment when he forgot he was only an instrument. But perhaps this wasn't a punishment. Perhaps this was his final, most terrifying and vital lesson. A leader is not the one who is first to plant the flag in the ground. A leader is the one who changes the DNA of a people so deeply that they can keep moving even after he is gone. True victory is when you are no longer needed, when you stand on the peak of Mount Sinai looking at a happiness that isn't yours, and you realize your journey is complete right here. True greatness is the ability to disappear at the right time, leaving behind not monuments, but free people. The story of Moses is not a fairy tale about miracles. It is the story of your fear, of your own life. We like to think that we long for freedom, but the truth is, freedom is not a celebration. Freedom requires choice. Choice requires maturity, and maturity is born only through pain. Look around you. Every era, over and over again, builds its own Egypt. The scenery changes, the names of rulers change, but the core remains the same. Humans fear being alone with the horizon. We dream of returning to where everything was decided for us, to where someone else is to blame, to where the chains provide a false sense of security. Remember this, God can take a person out of slavery in a single night, but to take the slavery out of a person, 40 years in the desert is not enough. Your Egypt is not in the past. It is in your refusal to be responsible for your next breath. Do you still want to be free, or do you just need your chains to be a little bit longer?